Good morning, friends. I'm Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed. I made a video which I have uploaded on my YouTube comparing the Christian and Muslim treatment of Jews, historically speaking. It was, of course, in the local Hindustani, Urdu, Hindi language, but many people want me to do the same in English as well because this is a subject which has uh, excited a lot of interest from people, and they want my understanding of this comparison to be available widely in the world. So now the thing is that if you look at the way Christians, especially in Europe, Western Europe, Central Europe, and Eastern Europe, the way they treated Jews who were fugitives after the Romans had taken over Jerusalem and they were dispersed all over the world, the Jews historically faced recurrent attacks on them by the host Christian societies. Because, according to the traditional Christian belief, Jesus was accused of blasphemy by the high priests of the Jews, and they went to the Roman governor of Jerusalem, Pontius Pilate, I think that was his name, saying that this man has committed heresy, sacrilege, by breaking the laws of Jews and he should be uh, punished with death. As has been recorded, Pontius Pilate was not very willing, but on the insistence of the high priests of the Jews, Jesus was then crucified. And then, of course, there are different beliefs on what happened to Jesus. Christians believe that he was put in a grave, but when they opened the door, he had ascended into the heavens. The Muslim belief is that he didn't die on the cross, but was saved by God, and so on. But Jesus had claimed to be the awaited Messiah of the Jews, and he criticized the corrupt practices of the moneylenders and so on. So that's the background. Because of this, and one of the accusations against Jesus was that he claimed to be the Son of God, which was considered blasphemous by the Jewish priests. Now, that sort of belief became part of the Christian way of understanding the nature of Jews, their role, and so on. And in Western Europe, I've noted in the city of York, 11th century, and then many times later in England, France, in Western Europe, Jews were attacked because they were denied the right to own land. They could only go into trade, and since they were into uh, charging interest, and many people were under debt to them, this resulted in recurring attacks on Jews. Much worse was in the case of Central and Eastern Europe, Germany, Australia, Austro-Hungarian Empire, then Poland, Hungary, all the way to Russia. There the Jews were especially targeted, and Zionism grew out of the experience of Jews in Eastern and Central Europe. And hence the demand for the state of Israel and the Balfour Declaration of 1917, and Israel came into being. And then all the Christians, this has to be noted, in Europe, there was one group which wanted evangelical Christians, British evangelical Christians, who, the belief among Christians is that Jesus will return once again. The Muslims also believe it. But when he returns, the Jews should be assembled in Palestine. And when Jesus comes the second time, and the Jews again reject his role as the Messiah or as the Savior, then they are to perish, they are to be killed. Now, of course, the Zionists know this, and until Jesus comes, they can play upon the belief of the evangelical Christians, who are a very special group, 40 million in America and elsewhere, mostly in the UK, Australia, and these places. The Roman Catholic Church and the Pope do not support this. Regular Protestant churches are also not in favor of this evangelical, messianic view of the return of Jesus, with Palestine exclusively for Jews, and then they being given the opportunity to accept him or perish. So that's one story. What I'm trying to say is that the Jews have been persecuted by Christians of Europe on a recurrent basis over and over again. Netanyahu, this Zionist extremist who's a fascist, recently made a statement and mentioned some of the wrong things done to the Jews. But all of them were events which had taken place in European societies. He could not mention a single instance of what happened to Jews who lived among Muslims. Now, among Muslims, there is one incident in the early history of Islam which it's recorded, and I'm sharing it. It is about a Jewish tribe, Banu Quraeza, who lived in Medina or on the outskirts of Medina, the city of the Prophet, where he had settled after Makkah. And apparently there was a understanding with the Jews of Banu Quraeza that they will support the Muslims against the Meccan armies, but they allegedly did not keep the promise, and they were in touch with the Meccans. So the Prophet ordered an expeditionary force on them. They were defeated, and then they surrendered to the Muslim army. And the Prophet Muhammad, then, in consultation with a Jew who had converted to Islam, ordered, according to old Jewish law, in a battle, people who were defeated were to be men were to be put to the sword. The women became chattel of the conquering armies, the Jewish army. So these Jews, now the Prophet ordered them to be beheaded. There were more than 700. And there are two sources where you can check this. One, Sirat Rasulullah by Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq died about 120 years after the Prophet. He has mentioned it. And then Tabari, about 200 years later, about 250 years later, he has done a massive work in the history of Islam and in jurisprudence. And I think in volume 8, you can see it. All his volumes are available on the internet. He mentions that the Prophet ordered Zubair and Ali to carry out the beheading, and about 700 plus Jewish men were beheaded after Banu Quraeza fell to the Muslim army. Now, the thing is, did that become an established practice among Muslims? The answer is no. because the Quranic verse, there is a Quranic verse which says that uh, the Jews, Christians, and Sabians. The Sabians are a group of people who are lost in history, but when ISIS attacked Iraq up in the mountains, some of these Sabians were discovered again. So there is a small group of Sabians who exist to this day. But generally, the Jews and Christians, according to this Quranic verse, once they are defeated and they agree to pay jizya, the protection tax, they can retain their religion and they can continue with their business and trade. And this became the basis of Islamic law, Sunni and Shia. So Jews and Christians could live among Muslims, live in peace and in protection if they paid the protection tax, jizya, and they could retain their religion as well as their businesses. And I think until the 19th or even the 20th century, Muslims societies had Jews living among them, and there is no comparable attacks on Jews by Muslims the way it happened in Europe in Christian societies. Netanyahu could not, in his recent detail of what happened to Jews, could not mention a single incident from events in the Muslim society. So, except for Banu Quraeza, the treatment of Jews and Christians is based on the Quranic verse. I think it's 9:29 or something. You can always check. That's not interesting. But so Muslim societies, I mean, when in 1492 Jews were expelled from Spain, most of them headed to the Ottoman Empire where they were given protection, and they settled in Morocco and in Iraq and everywhere, as well as in the Balkans where the Ottoman Empire had its position, its hold. These areas were under the Ottoman Empire and they lived in peace until the Zionist project of creating Israel came up. And then there is a Jewish professor, uh, every Amos or whatever his name, he's an Iraqi Arab Jew, white hair, who teaches at Oxford. He's on record saying that they lived in peace, and it is the Zionists who planted bombs in synagogues in Iraq, which exploded, and then the Jews in Iraq, who were not willing to come to Israel, started migrating to Israel. The same happened in Morocco and in other places. I thought this should be put on record. Comparative treatment of Jews by Muslims and Christians, the Muslim conduct has been much, much better. If you go to Istanbul, you will find that a mosque, a church, and a synagogue are next to each other, which is indicative of the tolerance which the Ottoman Empire practiced, which was the main Muslim empire in the Middle East for many, many centuries. So, if you look at this treatment of Jews, one thing, in 1992, 500 years after the expulsion from Spain of Jews, in Israel, the descendants of those Jews celebrated the 500 years of protection given to them by the Ottoman Empire. So I wanted this to be put on record. The main treatment of Jews is not based on what happened at Banu Quraeza, because there was this allegation of them joining hands with the enemies of Muslims. But on the Quranic verse, which recognizes them as the people of the book, that is, who believe in the same God. And one thing more, when Muhammad bin Qasim conquered Spain, there was a problem. The subjects of the Arab Umayyad, extension in the Sindh province was now Hindus, uh, Buddhists, and Jains. So Muhammad bin Qasim then wrote to the scholars of Islam, the jurists at Damascus, which was the capital of the Umayyad Caliphate, to ask for a legal ruling on how should Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains should be treated in Sindh and wherever the Arabs had established their power. And the ruling was that these people also believed in the same God as Muslims do. If they pay the jizya, the protection tax, leave them alone. They can practice their religion, carry out their businesses, and retain their places of worship, repair them so that they can continue. All this has to be kept in mind. So I've done this in English so that uh, this comparison can be available to the wider society worldwide. Academically speaking, uh, the Ottoman Empire's treatment of minorities has been praised extensively by Professor Will Kymlicka, a Canadian philosopher, social scientist, sociologist, who says that the way the Millet system, that is, representation of every religious minority in the Ottoman Empire at the court, was organized. You see, there were several Christian sects: Greek, Armenian, Maronite, Catholic, even Protestants, who were part of the Ottoman Empire. And then there were Jews, there were Orthodox Christians. All these churches uh, were represented in the Ottoman Empire. Political power was with the Muslims, but the non Muslims had extensive uh, share in the economy, and their religious freedom was guaranteed. So, if you go to, as I mentioned, to Istanbul and other parts of the Ottoman Empire, you will find churches, synagogues, and mosques next to each other, their walls touching each other. So, Professor Bill Kymlicka, in his book Multicultural Citizenship, says that before the modern period of individual rights given under the Human Rights Convention, a declaration of the United Nations, uh, the best system of communal peace was the one the Ottomans practiced in their empire. I thought I'll add this. Thank you very much. All the best, friends.